we all thought that Iraq had chemical weapons. He had a gas mask with us at all times. We were driving in his Humvee around his company's perimeter. Out in the distance, we noticed this pickup truck driving very quickly towards us. Was this an attack? Gas, gas, gas! Over 20 years ago, on March 20th, 2023, the 3rd Brigade of the 101st Airborne was in the U.S. invasion of Iraq.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
We were told that Iraq had developed chemical weapons, and maybe biological and nuclear weapons too. WMDs, weapons of mass destruction. These weapons were too dangerous to keep in the hands of Iraq's brutal dictator, Saddam Hussein. I was just a young first lieutenant, a platoon leader of the combat engineer platoon supporting one of the infantry battalions. For the first phase of the war, our mission was simple, but very crucial. We were tasked to move undetected in the night from Kuwait into Iraq and establish and defend a helicopter refuel station in the middle of the southern Iraqi desert. The modern 101st is a very effective unit because of its helicopter support. This is called air assault infantry. At this time, the 101st used troop transport helicopters like the Chinook and the Black Hawk, as well as attack helicopters like the Apache. At the very beginning of the war, the job of the Apache attack helicopters was to fly to the capital city of Iraq, Baghdad, and destroy as many Iraqi military assets as they could. Tanks, radar, artillery, air defense, things like that. The Apache can fly low, near the ground, and avoid radar detection and air defenses. And they would fly their missions in the darkness of night because the U.S. has the best night vision technology in the world and always trains for night operations. However, the distance from Kuwait to Baghdad was too far for the Apaches, so they needed to refuel somewhere in between Kuwait and Baghdad. This was our job. Code name Rapid Refuel Point Exxon, RRP Exxon, an entire battalion of infantry soldiers guarding thousands of gallons of JP-8 jet fuel, the crucial lifeline for hundreds of attack helicopter missions. As the battalion engineer officer, it was my job to give advice on how to build the defenses. I don't think I'll ever forget the sight of Apaches flying in at sunset, refueling, then flying off north to Baghdad. Everything was going smoothly until 5 days in, when everything stopped. What can suddenly stop the might of American attack helicopters? The worst sandstorm I've ever seen. It lasted days, and it stopped everything. Obviously, helicopters couldn't fly, but it was even too dangerous for U.S. tanks to drive. They couldn't see. They had zero visibility. I'm not exaggerating when I say that in the middle of the day, I could stick my hand out right in front of my face, and my hand would disappear. It would disappear into a cloud of reddish-orange sand that was just swirling around me. Sand got everywhere, everywhere. In our equipment, in our food, our water, into everybody's ears and mouth and eyes and up the nose, just everywhere. Sand was everywhere. I remember at one point it started to rain, and as the raindrops fell through the sandstorm, they collected the sand and became mud drops. So it was literally raining mud. This storm lasted for about 2 days, and once the sandstorm ended, We had to clean sand out of everything, out of our rifles, out of our vehicles, and even the chemical suits that we were wearing. Remember how I said that we all thought that Iraq had chemical weapons? Well, in the very beginning of this war, all the soldiers, we wore special protective chemical suits, and we had a gas mask with us at all times. We were so cautious of chemical weapons that every battalion had a special unit of soldiers with it. These soldiers were specially trained in chemical warfare. And they had equipment, they had these sensors that could detect just trace amounts of dangerous chemicals in the atmosphere. And when they would detect these dangerous chemicals, they would issue an alarm. There would be a loud siren that would start blaring off. And hopefully, this early alarm would give everybody enough time, advanced warning, to put on their gas masks and finish putting on their chemical suits before we received a lethal dose of poisonous gas. Well, a few days after the sandstorm ended, the initial phase of the war was also coming to an end. Our battalion received new orders. We were going to move north to Baghdad. So after receiving these orders one afternoon, I was with one of the infantry company's first sergeants and his driver. We were driving in his Humvee around his company's perimeter. As we were standing on a hill overlooking his company's defensive positions, a series of interesting events unfolded. Out in the distance, we noticed this pickup truck driving very quickly towards us, towards the battalion's position. And trust me when I say we were out in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the desert. So this was very unusual. Was this an attack? Were we discovered? Or was this simply a local Bedouin, one of the nomadic tribesmen that live out in the Iraqi desert? The battalion mobilized its QRF, the Quick Reaction Force. Their job was to go out and stop that truck before it reached the battalion's perimeter. And the three of us, the first sergeant, his driver, and me, we were all watching from the hill as the QRF Humvees roared out and blocked the path, forcing that truck to stop. And from where we were, we could clearly see that in the back of the pickup truck, there were two 55-gallon drums. What were they carrying in these 55-gallon drums? Was it fuel? Or was it maybe something much more sinister? Then, a few seconds after the truck stopped, we heard a blazing siren. It was the siren warning that we were under attack. We heard the call over the Humvee radio. Gas, gas, gas! Training took over. I didn't even have time to think as I ripped off my helmet, grabbed the gas mask in the bag on my hip, put it on my face, tightened it down, sealed the mask, and started to put on my chemical gloves. In only a few seconds, I had my gas mask on as well as the special gloves to protect my hands. And I was tightening the sleeves and the collar on my chemical suit when I looked over at the first sergeant, and I noticed that he was also finished putting on his chemical protective gear. However, his driver, he was still struggling to put on his gas mask. He was panicking, and it took him a few tries before his gas mask had a proper seal on his face, and he was already cursing to himself as he was putting on his gloves. Oh no, oh, fuck me, oh no. By this time, the QRF had also finished putting on their protective gear, and they were ordering the two men in the truck to get out, get down on the ground. The three of us, we were watching the QRF do their job in the distance when the PFC suddenly asked, "Hey, do you feel that? Are your hands burning?" Oh, my hands are burning. Oh no, I was too late. He started shaking his hands in a panic and screaming, it burns, I'm dying, my hands are burning, I'm really dying, are your hands burning? The first sergeant looked around, he looked at his driver and he looked at me, and he shrugged and calmly said, "I feel fine." He asked me, "How about you, sir?" Yeah, I replied. I feel okay. I don't feel any burning, First Sergeant. It turns out that the reason me and the First Sergeant felt fine was because there was no chemical attack. That sandstorm had actually damaged the sensors on the special equipment that detects a chemical attack. And those damaged sensors gave off a false positive. They just happened to do it at the same time that pickup truck drove up to the perimeter. Those 55-gallon drums in the back of the pickup truck, well, those ended up being full of gasoline because there are no fuel stations out in the middle of the Iraqi desert. So if you are driving through that desert, you need to carry a lot of extra fuel with you. The chemical experts in the battalion, they quickly realized it was a false alarm, and they gave the all-clear signal, and the siren stopped blaring out. And the PFC, he calmed down. However, he wasn't crazy. His hands were actually burning, slightly burning. He realized that he had not properly cleaned his gloves since the last time he went through tear gas training. So there were still small amounts of tear gas, which is actually a very, very fine powder, inside of his gloves. This is called CS gas, and like I said, it's not really a gas. It's actually a very, very fine powder, like baby powder. And when it touches your skin, it burns, it irritates your skin, and it really burns your eyes. And when it gets into your nose and your mouth and your lungs, it really burns. You tear up and you just spit, and it's pretty gross. It's not fun. The U.S. Army goes through this tear gas training for a few reasons, but the big reason is that it proves to its soldiers that their gas masks are effective. That PFC learned two important lessons that day. The first lesson is don't panic. Don't panic in an emergency situation. It doesn't help anything. And the second lesson is to take care of your equipment. Make sure your equipment is properly cleaned and functional. There's actually a very common saying in the military. If you take care of your equipment will take care of you. Thanks a lot for watching. A big thank you to all the channel supporters, and I sincerely hope that everybody watching never has to experience combat. Peace. Love. I'll see ya.